Uranium is a key component when it comes to the production of what? Of nuclear power and nuclear weapons. That today they call themselves poor. One asks the question, why?
Thank you. That's a very good question.
But before you actually respond, Nataka will respond to this proverb. Yeah. So the proverb that we get today from this country speaks in terms of love that is out there, and it says, "When a monkey climbs a tree, its bottom becomes more exposed to the higher it goes. When a monkey climbs a tree, its bottom becomes more exposed the higher it goes." What do you think the CAR people are telling us?
That's a good one. That's a very good one.
Yeah.
So literally speaking, the higher you expect to go in life, the more vulnerable you become. That's a direct interpretation I'm getting. The more vulnerable you become in terms of the more you're open to scrutiny, the more you do not have any privacy. There is comfort in remaining at a particular level. But the higher up you go, the more your issues are open to the public and to a wider audience. So I think for me, it's about leadership and vulnerability, exposure in terms of society, status in society, and vulnerability. So the higher you go up, the more your issues become exposed to everybody else.
Yeah. The reason I was saying this actually speaks to matters of law is because of my interpretation. I look at it in terms of, if you love what it is you do, even when you're climbing up there, you leave so much love that no one has nothing negative to talk about. But if you're not your bottom becomes exposed even some more, right? But let's go to the conversation, right?
No problem.
So here we find ourselves in terms of the war in Iran, and on the 28th of February 2026, the United States and Israel launched coordinated attacks on Iran. In both governments described as strikes against Iranian military, missile, and nuclear-linked infrastructure. Israel dubbed it Operation Lion's Roar. The United States called it Operation Epic Fury. One asks the question. We know for a fact that there was supposed to be discussions on the same in Geneva, but that never got to see the light of day because Operation Lion's Roar took place. Would diplomacy have solved the problems that we see in Iran today, especially when it comes to its nuclear program?
Thank you. That's a very good question. Now, I'll answer that question in two parts. Diplomacy would have solved that problem if Iran from the get-go, from the word go, from many, many years, over 20 years ago, had agreed to actually give diplomacy a chance. There's a time the world was willing to listen to Iran, and I'm not holding brief for Israel or the US. There's a time the world was willing to listen to Iran's side of the story. And they would tell them it's very easy. You say you are not producing weapons of mass destruction, you are not enriching uranium for nuclear weapons production. Give us access to these sites. Show us the proof. This is science. We will bring in our scientists, and there is a UN-mandated international body, the International Atomic Energy Agency. Send in the inspectors, give them access to all the places they are suspicious of. In other words, you have to negotiate with clean hands. So the problem for Iran in terms of giving diplomacy a chance has always been not negotiating with clean hands, meaning over a time, there is a certain perception and an image they painted about their regime that they cannot be trusted. So yes, I agree with you, and I've seen the posts. In fact, I think I saw on X a long post by either a foreign minister, I think Bahrain or Oman, stating how they had gone ahead and Iran had actually agreed that we are going to stop this and we are going to now play by the book. But the problem is, once bitten, twice shy. If you have someone who you have caught cheating you in the past, even in our own human relations, someone who has given you reason to doubt them, unfortunately, even the day they are actually trying to tell you the truth, it becomes very hard for you to trust them because you have caught them in the past cheating you and you have exposed their duplicity. That is where Iran finds itself. So as diplomacy was, on one hand, being given a chance, Israel and the US and other strategic powers who may never come to the light of day decided, you know what, we've had enough of this. And there has always been this issue that scientists have said and research has shown. Even Iranian opposition leaders have leaked information showing that Iran was very, very close to actually producing a nuclear weapon the atomic bomb, a nuclear weapon. So I think the US and Israel just decided, you know what, even as they are busy trying to negotiate, we are still going to do what we need to do. So diplomacy works when people negotiate with clean hands.
Yeah, but Githua, we hosted the Iranian ambassador to Kenya there, and he actually came with the documents and showing that over the years, these talk from Israel and the US that Iran has nuclear is far-fetched, because the IEA that you talk about had gone there and was convinced that Iran does not have nuclear, is not doing research with regard to nuclear weaponry, but that the countries, we talk about the United States and we talk about Israel, the countries that are talking down on Iran with regard to its nuclear programs are the countries who themselves have nuclear power.
It's true.
Right?
Correct.
So then one asks the question, if individuals who are asking us to not have, do have, how do they then come to the table with clean hands if they themselves are not getting rid of this nuclear power that they are stopping us from having?
You've asked, that's the elephant question in the room. So, 1945, the US deploys the first atomic weapon against Japan.
Hiroshima
and Nagasaki. The world discovers there is this one weapon that exists that is an existential threat to humanity. So powers of the world, quickly, China, Russia, countries rush to get it. But towards the late 50s, early 60s, they decide we need to control on who has access to this power. So we get the rise of the nuclear proliferation regime. A treaty is created where the countries that already had nuclear power sign and agree never to transfer that technology to any other country. Other scientists and other scholars out there come and say, no, allow the more the better. Let everybody have it so that everybody fears each other and we will have world peace. There's that whole debate out there in academia. But then countries of the world are like, if you saw the devastation that occurred in Japan, we would not want to think about an eventuality where we get another Hitler or some rogue leader who has this power at their disposal who would ever use it. So the NPT treaty is born and countries sign. And this is what it says in a nutshell. Countries that have the power, nuclear weapons, will never transfer that technology to non-nuclear states. And then non-nuclear states are made to bind themselves to the treaty that they will never seek nuclear energy for weapons purposes. You are allowed to use nuclear power to produce electricity
yes.
for medical purposes, for research purposes, but never for the weapon. So where Iran's problem comes in, and I don't want to draw them in, but North Korea, is that they are signatories to this treaty, but science has proven when you're using it peacefully. So Iran crosses that threshold, and that's where their problems begin. And coming back to Iran, let me now give you a quick history lesson. You will be surprised that it is the Americans in the 1970s, early in their good relationship with Iran, when Shah Reza was in power.
Yes.
It's the Americans who actually helped the Iranians get their first nuclear reactor for peaceful purposes, because the regime was friendly to American interests. During the revolution, when Ayatollah Khomeini took over in 1979, and the Iranian hostage crisis, when diplomatic relations collapsed between the US and Iran, the US realized we have left these people with an ability and the regime is hostile to us. So let's look at also global politics. The fact that we have this regime that is anti our interests and we have left them with potentially something that could become dangerous if they decide not to use it for peaceful purposes. Because under Shah Reza, that nuclear reactor was for peaceful purposes. So science has proved, and I know people will call it propaganda. I did research from 2007 to 2009. I did research about Iran's nuclear program. That was my master's thesis. And the information that I gathered, which was in public domain, was that Iran was on the threshold, had crossed the peaceful purposes use of nuclear power. So, back to your question. Who decides who needs to have the weapons and who cannot? That international regime called the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty. When you bind yourself as a nation to conduct yourself in a particular way, the only honest thing you can do is bind yourself and actually act according to that treaty. Yes, granted, later on, Iran started saying why we are pursuing the reasoning behind why Iran was pursuing nuclear weapons was because at some point the US was in Iraq. Iran lives in a nuclear neighborhood, so they felt Pakistan has nuclear weapons, India has nuclear weapons, the US is in Iraq, Israel down the road there, not really proven, might have nuclear weapons. So Iran said, we live in a nuclear neighborhood, why can't we also not have? And you can understand them wanting to pursue it. But here is the problem. The reputation that Iran had painted of itself from the time the Ayatollah Khomeini took over, till when now it became a real clear issue. Iran supports Hezbollah. Iran supports Hamas. Iran has funded so many countries whose interests are against major Western powers. And that's where Iran found itself. So geopolitics and science. Yeah.
But Githua, here's the question,
Yeah.
So at the time when Khomeini was taking over had taken office, he was friendly to the United States, right?
Exactly.
And that is Shariza.
The Shariza was friendly. Khomeini from day one was against.
Shariza was friendly to the United States, right?
Yeah.
But the moment someone else took office and was anti-US, then that becomes a problem. Now we need to look at these guys and these whatever. And one then would look at it and say, if I am friends with you, you allow me to do anything I want in terms of nuclear reactors. I can set up as many as I want because I am your friend. But when a different regime with different ideologies comes in and say, we can do our own things without you, I become a problem. Is that how Iran has been looked at it? Because here now we're entering into geopolitics.
Exactly.
Because we are anti-US, we are not friends to the US, and that becomes a global problem. Or is it because the Western powers had actual evidence that Iran was actually using their nuclear technology, they were using their nuclear research and development for weaponry purposes? Because many would say what the West has done is just conjecture, simply because the regime is anti-US.
Very good question. Now I'll enter into my area, a bit of academia. A quick 2-3 minutes lesson.
Yeah.
There's a theory in international relations called constructivism. I'll explain it as simply as I'll try and do it. Constructivism talks about human beings construct the reality and the world they live in. You construct the norms and the rules of behavior we construct the world we live in. And we label things. We say this is a bottle. When we were young, we were told this is a bottle. We believed it's a bottle, and it became a bottle. We believe things, we construct the realities and the world we live in. And in that world, we develop things we call shared norms, shared beliefs, shared rules that bind us together. And I'll now come to your question. Britain has, give or take, 200 to 500 nuclear weapons.
200?
Yeah, 200 to 500 nuclear weapons, the range around there, in between there. The US is not worried about Britain owning 200 to 500 nuclear weapons. Why? The British and the US share culture, share religion, share faith, share democracy, share a way of life. But the US is uncomfortable with the 5, 10, 20 nuclear weapons that North Korea possesses. Why? North Koreans and Americans have nothing in common. These ones are not democratic, we are democratic. Are you seeing where I'm heading with this? If someone shares certain beliefs and lifestyle, ways of living with you, you can pretty much predict what they will do. So, quote unquote, the US believes Britain and their nuclear weapons are responsible. They will not cause anarchy. But enter Iran. The first thing they did when they took over power, they kicked us out of their country, laid siege to our embassy, and they've had this bad relationship with the US. So, in the minds of the Americans and Western powers, Iran supporting Hamas, Hezbollah, and all these other non-state actors who have been against American interests in the Middle East is a red flag. If we allow Iran to get now this extra power, who is not to say the Iranians are going to allow Hezbollah one day? You could get a rogue leader in Iran who does something weird. Let me take you back to 2009, 2008, 2009. There was a president in Iran called Ahmadinejad.
Ahmadinejad, yeah.
Very radical leader. He once stood on global media and made a very dangerous pronouncement. And he said, if Iran gets the bomb, and at that time, Iran had produced a missile called the Shahab-3, which had the ability to hit Tel Aviv and many parts of the Middle East and any part of Israel. He said, we will wipe Israel off the map of the world. He made that. That's a diplomat. That's the chief diplomat of a country. When he made that Iran's foreign policy, that if we get the power to and the ability to, our first agenda is to wipe Israel off the map, automatically, I can already see in the Israeli psyche them deciding we will never allow Iran to ever get this bomb. We will never allow them to cross that threshold to threaten our very existence. So the current war we are seeing in the Middle East, what we have seen is that fear, that constructed reality in the Middle East, primarily between Iran and Israel. All right? The US comes in because its interests are threatened, and the US is a big ally of Israel. But the chief war here is between Israel and Iran. And this hatred, this rivalry goes into thousands of years. Remember Babylon. I remember when the Israelis were taken, if we take our Bible lesson, Israelis taken into Babylon. They are there, I think, for 70 years, Daniel, until they are released, they come back. So Persia, Iran is actually Persia. Yeah, so the Persian Empire, which represents the modern day Iran, and Israel have been at this for very many years. The constructed world they lived in, they never found a way to really be friends. Surprisingly, when Shah Reza was in power, Israel and Iran had no problem. They collaborated on so many things. But it is this Ayatollah regime that came into power, and now, I mean, I don't want to call them fundamentalists, but they became a bit radical in their viewpoint of the West and Israel, and the enmity came in. So Israel would not have didn't have a problem with Shah Reza, who was being given nuclear assistance by the US. The US didn't have a problem with Shah Reza. It is when the regime changes and the regime declares war, quote unquote, that the problems come in. So we find ourselves in a problem that has been constructed by Iran's hardline stance, and they have the right to have it. I don't want to condemn them. I don't want to dictate who should be whose friends. But here comes the problem. When you threaten the world's most powerful country, in this case the US, and its allies, or if you threaten one of the allies of the world's most powerful country, Israel, in this case, you're inviting problems. And all these problems are going to lead to unintended consequences. So that is my take. That is my quick summary over the whole thing. Without laying really full blame. It is the reality they constructed. It is deep geopolitical competition, and the fact that if you allow Iran to get nuclear weapons, it will destabilize the Middle East.
So I want to take a short commercial break, but when you come back now, we want to look at the war that is happening in the Middle East, right? And how that is affecting Africa, and specifically how that is affecting Kenya, because information that we woke up to is the fact that now oil tankers on the sea have been attacked. What should be the position of Africa Union with regard to the war, and how should Kenya then prepare itself or reorganize itself because of what is to come?
Thank you.
We take a short commercial break. We'll be back with much more as we continue with the discussion on matters to do with Iran, US and the Israeli war, and how that is going to affect different jurisdictions across the world.
This is the Situation Room, a way to start your day.
Intended consequences and the ripple effects that reverberate, and the shockwaves that reverberate around the world. So, number one, Africa buys a lot of its oil from the Middle East. That is one of the main sources of oil for Africa. So, if, like you've said, news reaching this morning is that oil tankers have been attacked, or if, God forbid, the Strait, Hormuz, and where most of this oil goes through into global markets, we can expect spikes of fuel in very many countries. That's number one. And once you touch the fuel, the cost of living goes up on literally everything else, because from transport, when you factor in transport, be it commuter transport, be it transporting manufactured goods, be it transporting foodstuffs, that gets affected. So expect a spike in the cost of living in the interim. Then trade gets affected in the sense that Kenya sells things to Iran. Oil, tea, exactly, coffee, all those things. Expect that to get affected. Definitely that means Kenya loses revenue. And then also now the cost to human life, because there are very many Kenyans, like you've said, in the Middle East. Remember, the Kenyans in the Middle East we're talking about the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, where there are all these opportunities. And I'm happy at least the government has been proactive in terms of trying to warn Kenyans to just, take care of themselves, make sure they are registered somewhere and follow the regulations that they're given by their host countries. But the biggest part I am seeing affecting Africa and Kenya in particular is in transport. A lot of Kenyans fly to Dubai or transit through Dubai and the Middle East on their way to the Far East. And when we have now Dubai closing down, when we have the UAE closing down its airspace and most of these Arab countries closing down their airspace, it means then a lot of business is going to be affected in terms of businessmen who are traveling, transiting through the UAE. So that becomes a very big problem because now delays in business, that costs money. Some people are attending conferences, some are attending business meetings that had been planned in advance as are going to resupply. So there's going to be, let's say the global logistical hub through the Middle East has been affected by this war. And it's going to have a big impact on Africa and Kenya in particular. Because Kenya, I know, does a lot of trade via transit and through Dubai. Yeah.
So Kenya also finds itself in a very interesting space where do you then condemn Iran? Do you condemn US and Israel for attacking Iran? Kenya finds itself in a position of non-aligning. It will not align with anyone in this situation. But one then would ask the question, can Kenya have a say in the war that we see today? Or is Kenya such a country that does not have a say when big boys are playing?
That's a very it's a very loaded question. It's a very nice question. So here is where you need pragmatic diplomacy. Pragmatic diplomacy meaning you do a cost-benefit analysis. We say nation states are rational actors. They should always do a cost-benefit analysis before they act. And whatever action they take should further their interests. So in this case, from my perspective, Kenya needs to stand on the side of humanity. Number one, Kenya needs to, of course, talk about the loss of, talk about diplomacy, giving diplomacy a chance. If at all, it has to make a statement giving diplomacy a chance so that the tension de-escalates. These are big boys playing, of course, and you can't enter into their fight because you become collateral damage. So the last thing you want Kenya to do is take a position in either condemning Iran, because we have strong diplomatic ties with Iran. In fact, we have an embassy there. One of our ambassador there, I think the retired Lieutenant General John Amongi is there, Ambassador John Amongi is there. So you do not want to expose Kenya to a place, you don't want to leave Kenya in a place where we are going to be left with egg on our face when the dust settles. Because all these things are recorded and the countries will not forget, you did not stand by us. So pragmatic diplomacy. Talk on humanitarian grounds. Talk about Kenya's stance on the side of peace. Kenya is talking about dialogue. Kenya is asking for tensions to de-escalate as both countries revisit the situation and you see how cost to life can be minimized, loss of life can be minimized. That is the language to take as a pragmatic country. It would be wrong for us to shoot ourselves in the foot by making a statement that would cast us as leaning on one side. That is where you do not want to find yourself. Kenya and the US have very strong ties. Kenya and Israel have very strong ties. But Kenya and Iran also have ties. So you want to balance this relationship. All right? You have to balance this relationship. This is a fight between your friends for their own reasons. Whether you agree with them or not, your stance is to try and tell them, okay, things have reached this place, how can we de-escalate? How can we help in helping de-escalate the situation? That is the language that Kenya needs to adopt at this level because Any other, you are shooting yourself in your foot.
Yeah, but it also paints a very interesting picture on what then the African Union, which is a representative of all the over 50 countries in the bloc, right?
Yeah.
And then one would hope that African Union would give its position on the ongoing war.
Exactly.
Because when you talk about the tankers being attacked as we speak right now, remember Africa exports oil, right? Fuel into the continent for us to be able to move. And that definitely will be affected. We expect to see fuel prices go up, you know. And with Africa and the continent knowing that, number one, what should be their position? Because one would assume that African Union speaks to the bloc like the European Union would speak to the South America and all these other agencies that are there. What should be their position, and what then should be in terms of responding to that, in terms of we have our own fuel, oil that we drill. What should African Union then be planning themselves around ensuring that we process this oil so that the continent might be able to be self-sustaining?
Thank you. That's a very good. I like the angle you have taken. Now, unfortunately, all right, the African Union, and I hope they are listening, the African Union has been a big disappointment in the past because it does not give a common position on some of these issues. I'll give you the example of the Russian-Ukraine war.
Yeah.
During the Russian and Ukraine war, many African countries voted on an individual basis when there were sanctions and voting was taking place at the UN about condemning. A lot of African countries abstained. Eritrea supported the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Very many African countries, either out of fear of Russia and repercussions from Russia, kept off that. All right. And this could have been solved by the African Union giving a common position. But the African Union rarely wants to put its head out there. So that's a problem number one that we get. And you've raised an important issue. And this is, I think, arising a call to Africa to realize that the rules-based order as it existed in the world has changed. In fact, I dare say as a prophet of doom, and I'm not a prophet of doom, but I dare almost predict, going forward, we will have more upheavals in various parts of the world on various reasons. The Russian-Ukraine war has not stopped. We have our Sudan conflict going on. There are tensions in Latin America. There are tensions all over the place. The moral of the story, the lesson for Africa is that what you've mentioned, that self-sufficiency. Africa has oil-producing countries like Nigeria, Angola, Libya. Libya is not up. Libya is in tatters, probably not the very best at the best of places, but it still has oil. This is a time the African Union should mobilize Africa as a continent. Some of these resources that we are so reliant on from external powers, external sources, we need to find out how can we utilize them such that when these global shocks come, we are not caught flat-footed. Africa's richest man, Aliko Dangote, has one of the biggest refineries in Nigeria. This would be an opportune time for Nigeria, instead of exporting its crude, to refine those products into diesel, petrol, kerosene, jet fuel, and sell to other African countries. At market rate, we're not asking to be given handouts, but at least shield and cushion African states from these global shocks that are coming in. Remember, already there's a global economic recession taking place around the world. Many countries are facing high cost of living, even without these wars. Now, bringing the complication of the Iranian crisis right now, the Middle East crisis, using Iran as one of the key producers of oil. We're expecting African economies to tank further. Many African livelihoods and homesteads are going to feel the pinch. We're going to feel it directly, especially a country like Kenya, where transport is a major growth driver of our economy. We are going to feel the shocks. So an already stressed economy is going to face a very difficult time in the government trying to explain why the pump prices are going up. And sometimes people cannot understand the math because they are like, but shouldn't we have stockpiles? So the moral for me, for Africa, is become more self-reliant. When the Russian-Ukraine war occurred, Africa got exposed on the food security angle. Yeah. Exactly, because our fertilizer comes from there. Our wheat comes from there. So we got exposed, and we have very arable land. Now we've gotten exposed on a critical mineral, oil. We have Angola, we have Nigeria, I think North African countries, some of them also produce oil, Libya. this is the first time we need to start thinking about how can, especially now like a country, part of Kenya's grand strategy, energy security, other than just buying oil from Russia and the Middle East, could we start talking to Nigeria and finding out whether we can be getting part of our fuel products from Nigeria, so that when these global shocks occur, we are shielded partly. That's number one. Number two, this is where now African countries, the Kenyan government included, needs to increase its reserves of some of these critical products like oil. What are our reserves? God forbid there is a third world war and nobody is exporting oil anywhere. How long can the Kenyan economy last? We need to probably have reserves that could last us 6 months, which is possible, or a year, as the world is normalizing. So those are some of the now. So in government now, those are now long-range planning. Someone in the Ministry of Energy should start thinking about what are our fuel reserves like. Should we think of having reserves that could shield us for like a year from these global shocks? Otherwise, we will keep on being reactive in terms of there's a shock in the Middle East, we are in trouble. China has done something, we're in trouble. Latin America has done something, we're in trouble. Why? Because our economy relies too heavily on the products and things that are coming from these other parts. So self-reliance is a word.
So based on that, because you've said Kenya does business with Iran, we say we sell our tea there, right? And because of this war and the airspace being closed and all the attacks that we see on the seas, it is difficult to export that. So that means directly, as we speak at the moment, in terms of export that Kenya would do, that in the meantime has stopped. That means the farmers will lose, the country will lose. That because fuel will not be coming in, fuel prices might go up. That will translate directly to the cost of living in the country. And that perhaps even us as Wananchi today, knowing we should be in tandem with what is happening up there, and we need to start thinking on how we're going to survive, how we're going to take off business in the near future. It is not just about government and what it has to do, but even as Wananchi, we must be aware and start planning. Would you reckon?
Correct. I'll even go further. I like your ideas, they're very solid. I'll even go further and ask the question, what happened to our oil in Turkana? That tallow, you get what I'm saying?
It's a good thing you just landed there because I was headed
Exactly, because now this is a perfect opportunity for us to have a conversation as Kenyans. Should we invest a little bit more in ensuring that if at all the oil that was found in Turkana, if it's economically viable, this is the time government should now pump and put in more money there, such that we may not be able to deal with everybody's problem, but selfishly, if we could shield Kenya, the Kenyan economy, from some of these shocks, we may not have a lot of oil in Turkana, but if it could be explored so that it helps to cushion us from those spikes in prices that could come up, it would make even governance much more easier, because I can assure you in the next I don't know when the fuel prices are going to change, maybe by the 15th of this month, all right, when EPRA sits down and readjusts. If it will be taking into consideration the new stocks of fuel that are coming in, people might see a difference at the pump price that will create an uproar, could lead to mini demonstrations. So you need to shock-proof your economy. I'm not an economist, I'm just throwing out terminologies. We need to kind of shock-proof our economy. Is it time to have a conversation about increasing our fuel stocks, our resilience, economic resilience? To what extent can Kenya shield itself from some of these global shocks? So do we go and now explore our oil and make sure at least a small quantity is being refined locally to get into our market so that prices don't change that drastically? Because I can assure you, if EPRA changes that fuel price by, let's say, 10 shillings to 15 shillings, because that is the indication, you can imagine what's going to happen on the streets. Government will get a lot of backlash, negative backlash, for a fault that is not of their making. But they will be accused of lack of foresight. The conversation will be like, but you should have shielded us. You should have given us fuel stocks that could shield us for like 6 months as negotiations and the cooling down and the Straits of Hormuz being opened up. So I think government, a clever government, it becomes proactive. You think ahead, you try and mitigate certain risks. Create fuel stocks. Do we have the reserves? Do we have the capacity? That's the question. If we don't, we need to have that so that because our economy is so dependent on fuel, from our transportation to our production, manufacturing, electricity generation in some quarters. So once fuel shocks occur, once the logistical chains around fuel, once there is a breakage in that logistical chain, we feel a direct shock.
One asks the question, with the war that is ongoing right now, are we looking at a war that is going to be longer than expected, or is it something that would be long? From where it is difficult to know how long it will extend. But with that, we know that with the killing of Khamenei, there's going to be regime change in Iran.
Correct.
And with that, then, would you see this being elongated because of the retaliations that we see, or would there be softened positions in terms of dialogue and finally finding a solution?
Yeah, that's a very good question. My prediction is that it's not going to be a long war. Reason being, the US and Israel have achieved their objective.
Okay.
Number one, remove the hardline leader who they felt was standing in the way of progress and change. All right? The regime has not changed per se, but the shock that is reverberating within them, even as they look to who is going to be the new leader. I know the next leader, the next Ayatollah, who is named, is going to approach things differently, seeing that the US and Israel will put action where their mouth is. So I have a feeling whichever new regime comes in is going to be a little bit more cautious in terms of how they engage. Two, there is word out there, whether it's propaganda or not, I'm not so sure, that the Iranians, I even had, I think, the President Donald Trump alluding to it, the Iranians are already reaching out. This is a big blow to their regime. They have lost half their military command, and actually they've been left exposed anytime a revolution could occur. If you've been watching TV, huge parts of Iran were celebrating the death of Ayatollah Khamenei, and there were parts that were mourning. That already has reset that society, as it were. So it's very possible that the new regime coming in will try and scale down that oppression, so to speak, that the Iranians were complaining about or demonstrating about. And a clever move from my playbook, a clever move would be, tell the Iranians, we are going to stop the war. So there's a ceasefire. All right, you have made your point. Why has Iran retaliated? They retaliated not because they could cause damage, but because out of pride, they did not want to just be seen as they were hit and they could not retaliate. So they retaliated out of pride, in my view, because they know they cannot win a war against the US. So de-escalate, have a ceasefire, give the Iranians time to mourn. They've declared a 40-day mourning. Remember, it's the month of Ramadan. You do not want to continue fighting during this month because the optics then, the religious optics are not good for you as Israel and as the US. So during the month of Ramadan, you have made your point, de-escalate. Let the country mourn, let them choose their new leader, and still tell them, our goalpost has not changed. A non-nuclear armed Iran, and whatever other terms and conditions are there, negotiate around them, de-escalate, give diplomacy a chance, and then hopefully also ease some of the sanctions. Because part of Iran's problems now is that economy has been sanctioned for very many years. So reduce some of the sanctions. Show them goodwill. Stick and carrot. Show them the stick when they are going naughty and then the carrot when they're behaving nicely. So stick and carrot, ease the sanctions, allow the Iranian economy to start reviving so that there is less tension on the regime. And when the regime sees we can actually do business with the West and with other countries without threatening Israel and the US allies in the Middle East, hopefully we will get a way forward.
Githua, one would ask the question then, has the world, as we speak today, allowed the big boys to misbehave and do what it is they want? I'm talking about the United States of America and Israel, right? So here is a situation where we know what happened in Gaza and the US being part of it. We know US went to Venezuela.